All right. So, Haley.
Yeah, yeah. So I had mentioned before that I was dealing with this kind of, you know, nesting issue with containers because, the way that Bravo handles, for example, I'm dealing with like cards, right? So
Yeah.
where you have an auto populate from a backend database. And I will just begin by saying that technology blows my mind. It is so exciting to see all of that data pushing through to the front. Um, but in the way that I'm handling those cards, I'd love to be able to scroll through them horizontally, and I'm just not sure if that's something that's possible to do. Um, oh, I forgot I'm not sharing my screen here.
So,
Um,
have you? I mean, you're not using a slider, a horizontal slider to do this
okay,
horizontal scrolling.
so as an example, so I am using a horizontal slider here, or like a carousel slider.
Yeah.
Okay. So for example, in my onboarding, um, I have, here's, the different carousel iteration, screen expressions. This
Yeah.
originally was designed as a scroll. As far as cognitive chunking goes, it actually made sense to break it down. But I was trying to troubleshoot with Marielle getting this to vertically scroll within a carousel slider. And her suggestion was, you know, a container within a container, which really wasn't working because then you can't nest a container within a container,
No, you can't. You can't nest a
right?
container. It doesn't work. And I'm not sure
So,
you can. I'm not sure you can scroll a slider. That's the problem.
right.
Uh, but so the other thing, like a conditional visibility, another thing that's super helpful is web views. So it would one option whenever you get really stuck and doing something that's kind of pushing what Bravo can do. One of the things we often fall back to is web views, and actually using web views as widgets is actually really helpful. Now you've got to use them in the right way, and there's certain limitations to them, but
Yeah.
that would enable you to scroll in
Yeah.
theory because you'd be scrolling inside the web view.
Right. Exactly. I think, you know, um, it is such an amazing thing. And like thinking about the long game here, knowing about WebView and the functionality that it opens up is so promising for us. But right now, trying to keep our product really simple and avoid rabbit holes as much as possible. I'm
Okay.
going to try to build this exclusively in Bravo Studio, but with the exception of things like clicking a link and opening in WebView so that I'm not bumping my user out of my product, right?
Okay.
Um, but this is maybe a halfway Ray and a halfway Toby question. So when my user logs in, they go through this check-in process, right? So the first check-in is basically, how are you doing? And, they select from a variety of emojis. Um, and that's how they identify, how they're doing, right? On the back end, the long game in terms of our development vision, oh gosh, where am I? I'm so lost in my own product here. Here we go. So the long game is that this is reflected is, charts and graphs, right? We want to reflect this data over time so that our user can like understand themselves better. But for now, given that this is an MVP, we want to just have that data accessible to the user. So the way that I've broken this down is, you know, two separate containers here. One is the symptoms, and you select the when, which will query the symptoms at that particular time. And then up here is doing the same. However, we don't place a limit on the number of feelings that somebody can select, right? So let's say they identified with 20, right? I have a space issue in terms of how to reflect that back to them if we're going to keep faithful to the original method of input, which is visual and with a word, right? My hack, if need be, is just that I provide a list of words, which for an MVP, I think that would be functional and I wouldn't have to deal with scrolling. But if I can, what I would like to do here is to treat each of those emojis as a card that when I query from the back end would auto populate depending on the number of entries. This might actually, I couldn't follow it super closely with Henry, but it might actually relate to the way that he solved his problem with conditional visibility. But when I query all of those, I want to see only the ones that are available, but also that my user can scroll them horizontally. Do you see that as being workable?
I'm trying to visualize this. Is this the screen you're talking about right here? And
Yeah, so this is
how
where
would it
our
look?
this is where the data recall, right? This is where my user logs in, they check in, with, two screens before they actually enter my dashboard. And then if they opt to, they can go to a place where we query the data that they provided upon check-in, and they can retrieve old dates and times, right?
Okay. Okay, so select when they will look, and so it would then show
Was
them
the
what they would
check-in.
have. Okay, and
Exactly.
so from the previous screen we had all the list of the emojis. The idea would be you'd have like a row of emojis of the different feelings that they had, right? That's kind of what you're trying to
Exactly.
replicate.
Right. And so like when I select from this selector here, the date and time,
Yeah.
it would then auto-populate this space, which would be scrollable.
So you could, I mean, you can just do that. Could just come. That could be a slider where the arrays come back from a date. So you could do all the different emojis as a slider from that date, right? So
Right.
that would work.
Yeah.
Um, and that would, you could have as many as you want there, and it could go off the screen, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But so when that's relatively straightforward. What what's the other part to this?
So I guess the complexity, and full disclosure, I redesigned this on Friday, and so I'm still thinking about these issues in terms of how to structure. But because this would be a horizontal slider, right?
Yeah,
Carousel with an auto-populate functionality,
yeah,
it would have to be a separate container from the select when, like the identification of the
yes,
particular input, right?
yeah, yeah.
Am I going to run into issues tying that because I'm in two separate containers? Like, when I select the
Yeah,
date.
so this is a bit hokey, and this is one of the things we're trying to fix. But effectively, what would happen is when you select the date, so generally what would happen is when you select the date, I guess you'd normally go to another screen, right, to
Mhm.
choose a date. I mean, you could, or a pop-up maybe, because you need to have a form to choose a date.
It would kind
And
of
then the
function
idea,
like a modal, I think is the way
yeah,
Bravo
yeah.
handles it.
And then the
Yeah.
idea being when it would come back, it would refresh the screen. And but what would happen is you'd have that date variable populated, and that date would then kick off the array of the emojis. So
Yeah.
depending on if the date when the date gets set, so when you first come into this page, that date's not set. But
Yeah.
when the date is set, then what would happen is the query would then pick up the date and find the emojis for that date for that user.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so they're in different containers, but effectively the setting of the date activates the function to find the emojis for that date.
Yeah. Yeah. Would I need to tag anything with like a refresh pull to trigger the.
Just I think refresh always, and then when you come back from the modal, it should refresh because you're going back to the page. It'll refresh the page based on the modal, and then because the variable has then been set, it should then the refresh will do the requery and pick up the data.
Okay. Super
Yeah,
cool. Thank you so
if I could
much.
just add to what Toby said, in the modal, when you have that action that submits the day, I would
Yeah.
recommend you don't use an action go back or an action close. I would recommend you use an action page go to. Otherwise,
Yeah,
it won't
that's true.
refresh the page properly.
Yeah, that's good. That's a
Okay.
good point.
I just want to make sure that my understanding when I'm describing a modal is consistent with what we're referencing here, which is that when how do I have this tagged, the selection? So I have a component input select here, which, thanks to the good folks over at Bravo, brings up a date and time selector that I have not built, right? I
Okay,
don't have control over tagging that. And that selector is what I'm referring to as a modal, but like that's
right.
maybe not the correct
Oh, okay. So effectively, the form is in this page. So
form
that's
is in this
still
page. Yeah. So the date input is here, and I'm just relying on the functionality that your team has built to allow me to
Okay.
select it in time.
So
So I
effectively,
can't design within that.
so the container is that form, and then when you submit that, what you would do is refresh the page. But because the variable is set when it comes back, that will then populate the emoji. So effectively, it kind of calls itself. And once you've set the variable, because what will happen is you kind of submit. I think the best way of doing this is maybe we could set the variable. Basically, what you need to do is set the variable by choosing that parameter, and then use that same variable to refresh the page. And so you don't actually need to have a separate modal because you're just effectively the form is within this page. So I don't think, I mean, you used to have to be able to actually have a separate page, but I don't necessarily think you need to do that in this instance.
I think she does, Toby, purely because there's a second form there underneath, and the symptoms you experience that has
Okay,
the same modal, so we can't have two forms on the same page.
Oh, we
that's true.
can't.
No,
No, that's a good point.
you can't have two action submits on the same page, or even two action set variables on the same page. Well, maybe you can have two action set variables,
Well,
but you
what
can't
if
have
they're
two
in two
actions.
separate containers though?
It's the page. It's at the page level. It's not a container thing.
Yeah, the forms are there on the page level. So effectively, what you would need to do is that button would need to be a link to a separate small modal window, which has got. I mean, it will look very similar effectively, but by doing that, it separates out the forms because we, as Sue says, we do forms per page, one form per page.
So just think about, and
Potentially.
this is for my
Oh,
own
sorry. Yeah.
no Zeus, go right
So,
ahead.
so yeah, potentially what you could do, and I don't know if this would work, maybe a set variable could work here because we could call a page refresh on set variable. So next to the component input, you can add the set variable action, which
Okay.
would in theory set the variable, and you can also add a refresh action on the page. I'm not certain if that would work though. Toby, please correct me if I'm wrong here.
I think it might do. I think probably the simplest thing here would be just to try and do a separate form. So it'd be
Yeah,
less
yeah.
likely to cause a problem. I would go for the safe bet rather than the trying to force it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I'm thinking just like from a usability perspective here, this is a clunky design. Like this whole thing is just clunky, right? Which I'm not worried about for my MVP, but what would probably be more effective on all fronts here is if when you get to this check-in screen, you see a question, which is what data would you like to see? Photos, feelings data, symptoms, or notes.
Right.
And then those buttons would just tee up the form or whatever, resource you're looking for, which would actually solve my auto-populate issue with the horizontal slider anyway.
Yes. That's a much better solution. You solved your own problem, Haley. You didn't need us at all. You just did it yourself.
Toby, you haven't spent the number of hours on this. No, I very much need all of your good brains to help me troubleshoot these things. So anyway, thank you very, very much.
Cool.
Haley, just one thing I did want to comment. So I was having a think about your slider problem earlier. And it did occur to me that it might be possible to separate out that individual page that you're having a scroll from into a separate page and then continue the slider. So the idea would be, is everything up until that page is one slider, then the button on the last item before that page is a action go to or just a regular prototyping link, which would go to that page, which would have the correct scroll. And then that button would then link to another slider, which continues the rest of it. So that could potentially fix your problem.
Okay. It's an interesting one. And I actually, the limitation actually wound up leading to a more usable solution in terms of the way that we want our user to interact with that data and the way that they're compelled to interact with that data. So breaking things into sections versus having this long scroll that, we know people aren't likely to engage is a much better solution. So it's great to have that, that method teed up. But I actually don't know that I need to necessarily rely on it here.
Okay, perfect. Yeah,
But
I was just
thank you for the
yeah.
thought.
Okay, perfect.
Well, very nearly gets us to the hour, which is very impressive, really. It's unusual to get such good timing.
Yeah.
It's all in the wrist, Toby.
Years of practice, right? Years of practice.
Yeah. So this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been absolute delight to do. We're doing this again next Friday. And I'm looking forward to again seeing good people then.
Next Friday?
The 20th.
Yeah, we're doing this once a week.
Yeah.
Tuesday to Friday, Tuesday to Friday.
Oh, so it's every other week. It'll switch back and forth.
Well, yeah. So basically, next week will be Friday, then the Tuesday,
Yeah,
then
well,
Friday
right.
next week.
And what will happen, we'll sort out what people are actually using, what works. I mean, this is all an experiment.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful, wonderful. Anything I can do to support it, just I figure my
Just
showing up is the best thing
keep
now.
turning up, so we have something to talk about. Hey, that'd be great.
You keep saying good things about Bravo.
Yeah, that's also true.
It's not hard. It's not hard at all.
Awesome.
Anyway,
All right.
thank you both.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.